Gang attacks loner rancher. They freeze when they see the Cherokee mark on his door. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. Picture this, a small, worn-down ranch in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town. The wind howls across the open plains, kicking up dust and tumbleweeds. But for the most part, everything is quiet. For the man who owns this ranch, silence is his constant companion. He's a loner, someone who's chosen to live life on his own terms, far away from the noise of the world. But today, the silence would be shattered. It started like any other morning. The rancher, a man in his late 30s, woke before the sun, stretched his aching back, and made his way to the barn. The cold morning air bit at his face, and he tugged his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he stepped out into the open. His routine was simple, unremarkable. He fed the horses, checked the cattle, and made sure everything was in order. But that morning, as he approached the barn, something was off. He froze in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he noticed movement in the distance. A group of men on horseback, riding hard, were coming toward him. He could see the dust rising in the air behind them, and he instinctively reached for the rifle slung across his back. His heart began to race. He'd heard rumors of bandits and raiders in the area, but he never thought they'd come for him. The ranch had been quiet for years, untouched, and he'd hoped it would stay that way. But now, it seemed his peaceful life was about to be disrupted. The riders approached with menacing speed, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The rancher's hand tightened around the rifle. He didn't know if he could fight off a group of armed men, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. As the men drew closer, they slowed, and the leader, a tall man with a scar running down his face, called out, "You there? Get out here." The rancher stayed hidden behind a stack of hay, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the leader barking orders to his men, and a sense of dread washed over him. The leader's voice was harsh, demanding, "This is our land now. You'll leave or pay the price." The rancher's mind raced. This was it. They were going to take his land, maybe even kill him if he didn't comply. He took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the hay, rifle raised. The leader smirked. "You think you can take us all on alone? You're making a mistake, old man." The rancher's hands trembled, but he stood firm. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and steady. "This is my land, and I'll defend it with my life." The leader laughed, signaling for his men to circle the rancher. Just as the tension reached its peak, one of the men noticed something strange. They all froze, their eyes widening as they saw the mark on the door of the rancher's cabin. It was a symbol, a mark that only a few knew the meaning of, a Cherokee mark, ancient and powerful. The leader's expression shifted from arrogance to hesitation. The mark held a weight, a significance that none of the men expected. The air grew thick with uncertainty. The rancher's grip on his rifle loosened slightly, but he didn't drop it. His past, a part of him he'd tried to keep buried, had come to the surface. The Cherokee people, his people, had a long history of defending what was theirs, and the mark on the door was a reminder of that legacy. The men exchanged nervous glances. The leader cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he asked, his voice now tinged with doubt. The rancher didn't answer immediately, but his eyes locked onto the leader's. "I don't know what you think you're looking for," he said quietly, "but you'd better leave now, while you still can." The gang members hesitated, their eyes flicking back to the mark, their resolve weakening. This wasn't just any rancher. This man carried the weight of his ancestors with him, and they could feel it. The leader, after a long moment of silence, gave a sharp nod. "Let's go," he muttered, turning his horse around. The gang slowly followed, retreating into the distance. The rancher stood there for a moment, his rifle still in hand, watching them leave. The air felt heavy, and for the first time in a long while, he could breathe a little easier. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The Cherokee mark on his door had changed everything. The peace he'd found on this land was fragile, and it wouldn't take much for it to crumble. But for now, the rancher had won. At least, for today. The rancher stood silently as the dust settled, the retreating gang now just a faint blur in the distance. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief, but it was tempered with an underlying tension he couldn't shake off. The Cherokee mark on his door had done its job for now, but he knew it wouldn't be enough to stop all threats. It was only a matter of time before someone would test him again. The morning air was cold, and his breath came out in visible puffs, but he barely noticed. He lowered his rifle, the weight of his hand heavy with a sense of responsibility. This land, his land, had been in his family for generations, and he would protect it with his life. But as he walked back to his cabin, something gnawed at him. He couldn't help but think about the leader's reaction to the Cherokee mark. It wasn't just hesitation. There was fear in his eyes. It was a fear the rancher hadn't expected. For years, he had lived in isolation, keeping his Cherokee heritage a secret, hoping to avoid any conflict. He had settled here to escape his past, but today, it seemed his past had found him. Inside his cabin, he went to the door and traced the mark with his fingers. It was an ancient symbol, one passed down through his ancestors. His grandfather had carved it into the door when they first settled here, and it had been there ever since. It was a symbol of protection, of strength, and of legacy. The rancher didn't believe in magic, but he did believe in the power of the past. The Cherokee had fought for their land, their rights, and their people. And somehow, that mark had always given him a sense of security. But today he wondered if it was enough. As he sat down by the fire, his mind wandered to the gang and what they might do next. They weren't the first group to try to take his land, but they were the first to leave after seeing the Cherokee mark. What if the next group didn't care about the mark? What if they were more ruthless, more determined? He couldn't afford to take that risk. He needed to be ready. That night, as he sat alone in the dark, he made a decision. He would no longer hide from his heritage. He would embrace it. The Cherokee blood that ran through his veins was not something to be ashamed of. It was a part of who he was, and it had protected him for generations. He wasn't just a rancher. He was a descendant of warriors, leaders, and survivors. He would stand tall, not only for himself, but for his ancestors. The next morning, he set out to the nearby town. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he needed to take action. He couldn't wait around for more threats to come to him. As he rode into town, the familiar sights greeted him, but there was a sense of unease in the air. The town wasn't as lively as it usually was. People eyed him as he passed, some with curiosity, others with fear. Word had already spread about the gang that had come to his ranch, and the Cherokee mark was likely the talk of the town. When he reached the sheriff's office, he dismounted and walked up to the door. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a weary look in his eyes, glanced up from his desk. "You here for trouble?" the sheriff asked, his voice rough. The rancher shook his head. "No, I need information." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, but motioned for him to sit. "What kind of information?" "About the gang, and about anyone who might be planning to come after me next." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You're a brave man, coming in here after what happened. But I can't help you if I don't know who they are. That mark on your door, some people around here are nervous about it. There's talk." The rancher's jaw clenched. "What kind of talk?" "Some say you're protected by more than just that mark. That you've got connections, that you've got people watching over you. Others think it's just a sign that you're one of them. One of the Cherokee who survived when others didn't." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" The sheriff hesitated before speaking. "It means you're seen as a threat by more than just the gangs. Some folks around here are still holding grudges against the Cherokee. You'd be wise to watch your back." The rancher stood up, his mind racing. He had known there would be risks, but he hadn't expected to be so openly targeted. The sheriff's words weighed heavily on him. But there was something else he needed to know. "What about the gang? What do you know about them?" The sheriff sighed. "They've been around for a while. Led by a man named Ransom. They've been causing trouble up and down the valley. But after they saw that mark on your door, they seemed to think twice." "What's Ransom's connection to the Cherokee?" The sheriff's eyes shifted nervously. "I don't know. But if he's anything like the others, he's not the type to back down easily. You'll need to be careful." The rancher nodded, his mind made up. It was time to take a stand. He couldn't hide from the past any longer. It was time to use everything he had to protect what was his. The rancher left the sheriff's office with a heavy heart. The words of the sheriff echoed in his mind. "You'll need to be careful." He had no illusions about what was to come. The danger was real, and it was only a matter of time before Ransom and his gang would return, possibly with more men. He had to prepare himself for what was coming. He couldn't rely on just the Cherokee mark anymore. That symbol had given him a temporary reprieve, but it wasn't enough to keep a determined gang at bay. As he rode back to his ranch, he thought about his options. The sheriff had told him that Ransom's gang had been causing trouble all over the valley, and if they were after him, they wouldn't stop easily. The rancher knew he couldn't face them alone. He needed help, but he wasn't sure where to turn. He had lived on his own for so long that asking for help felt foreign to him. But he wasn't the same man he had been when he first settled here. His Cherokee ancestors had fought for their land, and he would do the same. As the sun began to set, the rancher made a decision. He would go to the only place he knew he could find help, the nearby reservation. The Cherokee had always been a tight-knit community, and even though he had distanced himself from them for years, he couldn't deny the call of his heritage. The tribe had always been there for him when he needed them. It was time to call on them again. When he arrived at the reservation, the air was thick with the sounds of drums and chanting. The people were gathered around a fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The rancher approached cautiously, not sure how he would be received. He had been away for so long, and he wasn't sure if they would welcome him back. But as he stepped closer, one of the elders, a woman with silver hair and wise eyes, spotted him. She smiled and gestured for him to come forward. "You've returned," she said softly. "The spirits have been watching over you." The rancher nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He hadn't expected such a warm welcome. "I need help," he said simply. "There's a gang, Ransom and his men. They're coming after me. I can't protect the land alone." The elder nodded again, her expression serious. "You are not alone," she said. "You never were. The land is ours, and we will defend it together." She turned to the others gathered around the fire. "Prepare yourselves. We will stand by the rancher, as our ancestors stood by each other." The rancher's heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. The Cherokee mark on his door wasn't just a symbol of his ancestors. It was a symbol of a community that would stand with him, no matter the cost. That night, they made their plans. The rancher and the Cherokee warriors would meet the gang head-on. They would not let Ransom and his men take what was rightfully theirs. As the fire burned low, the rancher felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just defending a piece of land anymore. He was defending a legacy, a history, and a community that had always been there for him. The next morning, the rancher and the warriors set out for the valley. The air was thick with anticipation, and the sound of hooves echoed through the mountains as they rode. The rancher couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He was no longer the lone man on the plains. He was part of something much bigger. As they approached the valley, they could see the gang in the distance. Ransom's men were gathered around a campfire, their horses tethered nearby. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the showdown. He signaled to the Cherokee warriors, and they spread out, moving with the quiet precision of hunters. The rancher dismounted and stepped forward, his rifle in hand. He could feel the weight of the Cherokee mark on his back, a reminder of everything he was fighting for. Ransom looked up, his expression surprised. "You brought reinforcements," he sneered. "You think you can stand against us?" The rancher met his gaze, his voice steady. "This land is ours, and we'll protect it with everything we've got." Ransom's eyes flicked to the Cherokee warriors, and for a moment, he hesitated. But the hesitation was brief. He motioned for his men to draw their weapons. "Take them down," he shouted. The battle erupted in an instant. The sound of gunfire and shouting filled the air as the two sides clashed. The rancher moved quickly, his rifle steady in his hands. The Cherokee warriors fought with the skill and ferocity of their ancestors, their movements fluid and precise. They had trained for moments like this. They knew what was at stake. The rancher fought alongside them, his heart racing. This was the fight he had been waiting for, the fight that would define his future. But even as the battle raged on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The gang seemed to be retreating too easily, almost as if they had been expecting something to happen. Just as the rancher took down another of Ransom's men, he heard a sound behind him. He turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows, a figure he had not expected to see again. As the dust of battle hung thick in the air, the rancher's grip on his rifle tightened. The gunfire had slowed, and the chaos of the fight seemed to fade into the distance. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart racing as he surveyed the field. He had taken down more than one of Ransom's men, and the Cherokee warriors had fought valiantly alongside him. Yet, something didn't feel right. The gang had been retreating faster than expected, and the figure that emerged from the shadows confirmed his fears. The rancher's eyes locked on the man stepping into the light. Ransom. But this wasn't the same man he had seen earlier. There was something different about him now. The smile that curled at the corner of Ransom's mouth wasn't one of victory. It was one of satisfaction, as though he had anticipated this moment. Did you really think this was over? Ransom's voice cut through the tension like a knife. The rancher's pulse quickened, his instincts on high alert. What are you talking about? He demanded, keeping his rifle ready. You're not getting away with this, Ransom sneered. You've been played, my friend. This wasn't about your land. It was about sending a message. The rancher's confusion deepened. A message? What message? Ransom laughed, a low, dark sound. The Cherokee mark on your door. It's not just a symbol, is it? It's a warning, a challenge. You think it's your protection, but it's actually a beacon for more than just me. The rancher's mind raced as Ransom's words sank in. He had thought the mark was just a symbol of his heritage, something that would protect him from the outside world. But now he understood. It wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. A legacy of power and violence that stretched far beyond his isolated ranch. You don't know what you're dealing with, Ransom continued, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. The Cherokee aren't just a tribe, they're a force. And they've been waiting for someone like you to rise up, to make a stand. But you're not ready for this. You don't even understand what that mark represents. The rancher's thoughts began to spin. The Cherokee had always been part of him, but he had never truly embraced that part of himself. He had hidden from his past, buried it deep in the hopes of living a quiet, peaceful life. But now it seemed his past had come rushing back to claim him. What do you want, Ransom? The rancher's voice was cold, his fear now replaced by anger. What do you think all this is about? Ransom stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. I want you to understand, rancher. That mark on your door, it's a challenge. And it's not just to me. It's to everyone who's ever tried to control this land. To everyone who's ever tried to push the Cherokee down. You're calling on a power that you don't fully grasp. The rancher took a step back, his thoughts racing. He had never seen Ransom like this, and he realized the man wasn't just a bandit. He was a man with a deeper, darker agenda. You've got no idea what you're up against, Ransom said, his voice low and threatening. The Cherokee mark isn't just a sign of protection. It's a rallying cry, and you're the one who's going to have to answer for it. The rancher's eyes narrowed, a deep sense of dread settling in his chest. I'm not afraid of you, Ransom. You should be, Ransom said, his voice dripping with malice. Because it's not just me you have to worry about. There's a whole world out there, waiting for you to slip up. And when you do, they'll be there, ready to finish what they've started. The rancher stood tall, his hands steady as he gripped his rifle. He wasn't ready to back down. Not now, not ever. You're not going to intimidate me, he said, his voice unwavering. I will protect what's mine. Ransom's eyes flashed with anger. Then prepare for the consequences. With a swift motion, Ransom turned and signaled to his remaining men. As they mounted their horses and began to retreat, the rancher stood still, watching them fade into the distance. His heart was still racing, but he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Cherokee mark on his door had drawn a line in the sand. And now, he had to decide whether he would fight to protect what was his, or let the forces of the past take control. The rancher glanced over at the Cherokee warriors, who were still standing firm, watching the retreating gang with silent determination. He knew one thing for certain. He was not alone in this fight. And no matter what happened next, he would face it head-on, with the strength of his ancestors at his back. The rancher stood motionless, the sound of hooves fading into the distance as Ransom and his gang retreated. His hand was still gripping the rifle, though the fight had ended. The adrenaline coursing through him slowly began to subside, replaced by a gnawing feeling of unease. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Cherokee mark on his door had been enough to turn Ransom back, but it wasn't going to stop the real danger from coming. He knew that now. As the Cherokee warriors gathered around him, their expressions unreadable but firm, the rancher took a deep breath and turned toward them. What now? He asked, his voice low but steady. The elder from the reservation stepped forward, Her eyes narrowed, her hands folded in front of her. "Now we prepare," she said simply. "This isn't over. They will come again, and they won't stop until they've destroyed what we've built." The rancher nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had never truly understood what the Cherokee mark meant, until now. It wasn't just a symbol of his heritage, it was a call to arms, a rallying cry. And he had to answer it. "How do we prepare?" The rancher's voice was more urgent now. He had never been a warrior. He had spent years building this ranch, working the land, and keeping to himself. But now, everything was different. His heritage had caught up with him, and he was no longer just a rancher. He was a protector. The elder's eyes softened for a moment, and she spoke in a quiet, yet powerful tone. "We strengthen our defenses. We gather our people, and we wait for the right moment." The rancher felt the weight of her words. It sounded simple, but he knew it wasn't. The gang was just the beginning. There were others out there, watching, waiting for an opportunity. He had to be ready. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The rancher worked alongside the Cherokee warriors, reinforcing the fences and gates around the property, setting up lookout points in the hills, and training with the warriors in the art of survival. It was grueling work, but necessary. He learned quickly that strength came not just from weapons, but from unity. The Cherokee were a family, bound by something deeper than blood, a shared history, a shared purpose. As the days turned into weeks, the rancher felt himself changing. He no longer saw himself as just a man on a farm. He was a leader, a defender, and a symbol of the strength that had carried his people through centuries of struggle. And as the sun set each evening, casting long shadows over the land, he knew that the moment of truth was drawing nearer. He didn't know when the next attack would come, but he could feel it. The air was thick with anticipation, and every creak of the wind seemed to carry a warning. One night, as he stood on the porch of his cabin, looking out over the valley, he saw it. In the distance, silhouetted against the rising moon, he saw the figures, shadows moving like ghosts through the trees. His heart raced, and his hand instinctively went to his rifle. He wasn't sure if it was the gang or someone else, but he had no intention of waiting to find out. He quickly signaled to the Cherokee warriors, who were scattered throughout the ranch, ready for whatever came next. The rancher had learned from the previous encounter. This time, they would not be caught off guard. The warriors moved silently through the night, taking their positions as the rancher did the same. They were ready. The sound of hooves grew louder, and soon, the shadows resolved into figures on horseback. The rancher's breath caught in his throat. There were more this time, more than he had expected. The gang had returned, and they weren't alone. Ransom was in the lead, his face twisted in a sneer. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were others, riders with strange markings on their faces, men from distant lands, perhaps even mercenaries. The rancher's mind raced, but his body moved on instinct. He could see the fear in the eyes of the men approaching, but he also saw the hunger for power, the thirst for domination. The battle was about to begin again. The rancher's voice was calm as he addressed the men, his rifle raised. "You're not welcome here," he called out, his words cutting through the silence. "This is my land, and I will defend it with everything I have." Ransom laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the valley. "You think you can stand against us, old man? You're not even a true Cherokee." The rancher's grip tightened. He knew what Ransom was trying to do. He was trying to provoke him, to break his spirit. But the rancher was no longer the man he used to be. He had found strength in his heritage, in the blood of his ancestors that ran through his veins. "I am Cherokee," the rancher said firmly, "and you will learn the price of underestimating us." The air crackled with tension as the two sides faced off, and in that moment, the rancher realized the battle ahead wouldn't just be for the land. It would be for the soul of his people. And this time, he wouldn't back down. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the land. The rancher stood at the edge of his porch, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive, as if the very air knew what was about to unfold. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his fingers tightening around the rifle. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This time, it wasn't just about protecting his ranch. It was about protecting his heritage, his ancestors, and everything they had fought for. The gang had returned, and they weren't alone. As the figures on horseback drew closer, The rancher could see the grim determination in their faces. They had come for more than just land. They had come for something far more valuable. Ransom rode at the front, his eyes scanning the rancher's position. But this time, he wasn't sneering. This time, he looked more like a man on a mission. The rancher's grip on his rifle tightened. The elder from the reservation had warned him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something much bigger. The Cherokee mark on the door wasn't just a symbol. It was a signal to anyone who understood its meaning. A challenge. A declaration of strength. And now, the rancher knew that Ransom and his men were here to test that strength. The warriors who had fought with him before moved quietly into position, their eyes locked on the approaching gang. There was no fear in their movements, only the calm confidence of those who had fought and survived. The rancher took a deep breath. He wasn't afraid, but he was prepared. The air seemed to thicken with each passing second. Finally, the gang came to a halt at the edge of the ranch. Ransom dismounted, his eyes fixed on the rancher. "You should have stayed out of this," Ransom said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't your fight." The rancher met his gaze, his voice steady. "It's my fight because this is my land. And this time, I'm not backing down." Ransom's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment. "We'll see about that," he said. Without warning, he gave a sharp signal, and the gang members began to move. The rancher's heart raced, but he remained calm. He had trained for this moment. He had prepared. He raised his rifle, his eyes scanning the movement of the gang. The warriors around him were already in position, their bodies tense and ready. The battle was about to begin. The first shots rang out, cutting through the silence like thunder. The rancher ducked behind a nearby barrel, returning fire as the gang advanced. The sound of gunshots filled the air, the sharp crack of rifles mingling with the roar of horses and the shouts of men. The rancher's thoughts raced as he took aim, his mind focused on one thing: survival. He couldn't let them win. Not now. Not after everything. The Cherokee warriors moved with precision, their training evident in every movement. They fought not just with skill, but with purpose. Each shot was carefully aimed, each movement deliberate. They weren't just defending the rancher's land. They were defending their heritage, their people, and their future. The rancher fought alongside them, his rifle steady in his hands. He could feel the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders, their strength flowing through him. This wasn't just his battle. It was theirs too. As the battle raged on, the rancher began to notice something. The gang, once so confident and aggressive, was beginning to falter. They were being pushed back, their ranks thinning as the Cherokee warriors pressed forward. Ransom, who had once been so sure of his victory, seemed to be losing his grip on the situation. His men were retreating, and he was left standing at the center of the chaos, his face twisted in frustration. "Fall back," Ransom shouted, his voice barely audible. Over the sound of gunfire, the gang began to retreat, their horses scattering in all directions. The rancher's pulse slowed as he watched them flee, but he didn't let his guard down. The fight was over for now, but he knew it wasn't truly finished. There would be more battles ahead. The rancher stood tall, his rifle still in hand, watching the retreating figures of Ransom and his gang. The Cherokee warriors moved forward, their expressions stoic but proud. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The rancher knew the cost of peace. It was never truly free. As the last of the gang disappeared into the distance, the rancher turned to the elder who had fought beside him. Her eyes met his, and she nodded. "You've done well," she said softly. "But this is just the beginning. The land is ours, but we must continue to defend it." The rancher nodded, his resolve hardening. He was ready for whatever came next. He had learned something important today. He wasn't just fighting for land. He was fighting for a legacy, and he would never back down again. The rancher stood in the aftermath of the battle, his rifle still in hand, scanning the horizon as the dust began to settle. The Cherokee warriors around him moved with quiet purpose, checking the fallen, tending to their wounded, and securing the area. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was fleeting. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Ransom's gang had retreated, but that was only a temporary victory. The rancher knew they would return, and with them, more trouble. The rancher turned to the elder, who was now standing by his side. Her face was unreadable, her eyes scanning the surrounding area with a practiced gaze. "We've won this round, but it's not over," the rancher said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. The elder nodded, her expression solemn. "No, it is not over. The land is ours, but we must continue to protect it. There are others who will come, and they will not stop until they have what they want." The rancher exhaled sharply, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. He had known this fight was only the beginning, but hearing it aloud made it feel more real. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking out at the land he had fought so hard to protect. The elder's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We prepare, we gather strength, and we stand together, as our ancestors did." The rancher nodded, a sense of clarity rising within him. He had fought alone for so long, but now he understood that this fight wasn't just his. It was a fight for all who had come before him, for the land, and for the future. That night, as the fire burned low, the rancher sat with the elder and the other Cherokee warriors. They spoke in low tones, planning their next steps. They knew the gang would return, and they needed to be ready. The elder shared stories of the past, of battles fought by their ancestors, of victories won and lost. The rancher listened intently, absorbing the lessons of those who had come before him. As the fire flickered, the rancher felt the weight of their legacy on his shoulders. It was not just about survival. It was about honor, pride, and the will to defend what was theirs. The next few days were spent preparing. The rancher and the warriors worked together, fortifying the ranch, reinforcing the fences, and setting traps in the surrounding woods. Every corner of the land was scouted, every pathway secured. The Cherokee warriors taught the rancher the old ways of the tribe, how to track, how to move silently, how to survive in the harsh terrain. It was grueling work, but the rancher welcomed it. He had learned that survival wasn't just about strength or firepower. It was about unity, knowledge, and respect for the land. As the days passed, the rancher's connection to the land deepened. He began to see the land not just as property to protect, but as something sacred, something worth fighting for. The Cherokee warriors had taught him that. It wasn't just about fighting off invaders. It was about protecting the legacy of those who had lived on this land for centuries. Then, one evening, the feeling of unease returned. The rancher had been on high alert for days, knowing that Ransom and his men would not stay away for long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the rancher stood outside, his eyes scanning the tree line. It was then that he saw it. A figure, moving silently through the shadows. His hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across his back. He wasn't sure if it was one of Ransom's men or someone else, but he wasn't taking any chances. The figure stepped into the clearing, and the rancher's grip tightened on his rifle. "Who's there?" he called, his voice low but firm. The figure stopped, revealing himself to be a man, dressed in the rough clothes of a traveler. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but the rancher could see the gleam of a knife strapped to his belt. "I mean no harm," the man said, his voice rough. "I've heard stories about what's been happening here. I'm just passing through." The rancher didn't lower his rifle. "What kind of stories?" he asked, his suspicion growing. The man paused, then stepped forward slowly. "That you've been fighting off bandits. That you've got something the gangs want. Word travels fast, and I'm here to see for myself." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "And what are you looking for?" The man gave a small, almost rueful smile. "I'm looking for a way to survive. I've been on my own for too long, and I'm willing to help if it means getting through this storm." The rancher didn't lower his rifle, but something in the man's eyes told him he wasn't lying. "You're not the first one to come around asking for help," the rancher said, "and you won't be the last. But if you're going to help, you'd better be ready for what's coming." The man nodded. "I'm ready." The rancher studied him for a moment before nodding in return. "All right then, we could use the extra hands. But don't think for a second that this is going to be easy." The man's face hardened, and he reached for his knife. "I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for a fight." The rancher allowed himself a small nod, then motioned for the man to follow him. The war was far from over, and if this stranger was willing to fight beside him, he would need all the help he could get. Together, they would stand against whatever came next. The rancher and the stranger moved silently through the trees, the fading light of the day casting long shadows over the land. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the wind carried the sound of rustling leaves. They had joined the other Cherokee warriors, their movements synchronized as they made their way to the strategic position they had prepared days before. The rancher's thoughts raced. He knew Ransom and his men would return, but now there was more at stake than ever. They had retreated once, but he had a feeling they wouldn't be satisfied until they had finished what they started. As they reached the lookout point, the rancher signaled for the stranger to stay low. The man nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll come soon," the rancher muttered, his voice calm but filled with resolve. The stranger didn't speak, but his posture indicated that he understood. They were both waiting for the inevitable. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. The fire they had built was low, its orange glow flickering in the distance. The rancher tried to remain focused, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. It wasn't just about defending the land anymore. It was about standing for something much larger. The Cherokee legacy, the history of his ancestors, all rested on his shoulders. Just as the rancher thought the night might stretch on endlessly, the sound of horses reached his ears. He looked to the stranger, who met his gaze with a brief nod. They weren't alone. The gang had returned, and they had brought reinforcements. The rancher's heart pounded as he signaled to the Cherokee warriors, who moved into position with practiced ease. The gang was approaching in the distance, their figures barely visible in the shadows. There was no hesitation this time. Ransom and his men had come for blood. The rancher steadied his breathing and tightened his grip on his rifle. He could feel the Cherokee mark on his door, a symbol of his strength, burning in his mind. He wasn't just protecting his land now. He was protecting his people, his heritage, and the honor of his ancestors. As the gang drew closer, Ransom's voice rang out in the night. "This ends tonight, rancher," he shouted, his voice dripping with fury. The rancher's eyes narrowed. "It ends when you leave this land, Ransom." The battle began with a roar as the two sides clashed. Gunfire rang out, and the sounds of shouting filled the air. The rancher ducked behind cover, his rifle raised and steady. His heart beat in his chest like a drum, but he remained calm, his movements fluid and precise. The Cherokee warriors fought like ghosts in the night, their presence barely detectable as they moved in perfect synchronization. Every shot was calculated, every move deliberate. The rancher wasn't just fighting for his survival. He was fighting for everything he held dear. The battle raged on, and the rancher could feel the tide beginning to turn. The gang, once confident and aggressive, began to falter. The Cherokee warriors had them pinned down, and their resolve was breaking. Ransom's face twisted with rage as he looked around, his men retreating one by one. The rancher could see it in his eyes, the fear that had been absent before. This time, Ransom knew he had met his match. But just as it seemed victory was within their grasp, the unexpected happened. From the shadows, a group of riders appeared, their silhouettes illuminated by the faint light of the moon. The rancher's stomach tightened as he recognized the markings on their clothing. These weren't just bandits. They were mercenaries, hired hands, the kind of men who fought for money, not honor. The stranger stepped up beside him, his eyes scanning the new threat. "More of them," he muttered. "Looks like Ransom's not done yet." The rancher gritted his teeth. "They'll regret this," he said, his voice filled with resolve. The gang's reinforcements rode in, joining the battle, and for a moment, it seemed like the odds were too stacked against them. But the rancher knew something the gang didn't. The Cherokee weren't just defenders, they were warriors, and they had the advantage of knowing the land better than any outsider. With the gang closing in, the rancher made his move. He signaled to the Cherokee warriors, who moved swiftly, creating a diversion that allowed the rancher and the stranger to flank the mercenaries. In a matter of moments, the tide began to turn once again. The mercenaries were caught off guard, and the rancher seized the opportunity. With one swift motion, he took down the first rider, his rifle echoing in the night. The fight continued, but the mercenaries were losing ground. As Ransom's men retreated once more, the rancher felt a surge of adrenaline. He had done it. They had won. But as he looked around at the fallen bodies, the feeling of victory was hollow. The battle had been fierce, but the war was far from over. The gang would return. They always did. And the rancher knew that the next fight would be even more dangerous than the last. With the mercenaries gone and the gang retreating, the rancher turned to the stranger, who stood beside him, his face unreadable. "This isn't over," the rancher said quietly. "I know," the stranger replied. but we'll be ready." The rancher stood at the edge of his land, watching the smoke rise from the distant hills where the remnants of the battle had taken place. His body ached, bruised from the fight, but his mind was clear. The gang had retreated for now, but he knew they would be back. Ransom and his men wouldn't give up so easily. The wind carried a chill, and the rancher pulled his coat tighter around him, feeling the weight of the night settle into his bones. The Cherokee warriors had fought with him, standing firm beside him, and they had proven their strength, but he understood the truth of the elders' words. This wasn't over. It would never truly be over until the land was safe from those who sought to destroy it. The rancher turned, looking at the stranger who had joined their cause. The man had proven himself in battle, and the rancher had come to trust him, but there was still a quiet tension between them. "You fought well," the rancher said, his voice rough from the exhaustion of battle. The stranger nodded, his face unreadable. "I'm not here for praise. I'm here to help, and we both know this is far from finished." The rancher's eyes narrowed as he looked at the stranger. The truth was undeniable. Ransom's retreat had been just the beginning. They would regroup, strengthen their forces, and return for what they thought was theirs. But the rancher was no longer the man he had been. The battle had ignited something inside him, something deeper than just survival. He was fighting not just for his land, but for a future where his ancestors' legacy would live on, where the Cherokee mark would not be a symbol of challenge, but of strength. "We'll be ready for them," the rancher said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll stand together, and we'll make sure this land stays ours." The stranger gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's the spirit," he said, his tone quieter now. The two men stood in silence, their gazes locked on the horizon. The rancher knew that in the days ahead, there would be more preparations, more planning, and more fighting. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting alone anymore. The Cherokee warriors had shown him the power of unity, the strength of community. They were more than just protectors. They were family, bound by something far stronger than blood. The rancher turned back toward the cabin, the weight of the rifle on his back, now a constant reminder of the fight ahead. But it wasn't just a fight against Ransom and his men. It was a fight for the future, for a legacy that could not be erased. As he walked back to the cabin, the sounds of the warriors behind him slowly faded, leaving only the sound of his own footsteps. The night was quiet now, the chaos of battle replaced by the stillness of the land. But even in that quiet, the rancher knew that the next battle would come, and when it did, he would be ready. The Cherokee mark on his door wasn't just a symbol of his heritage, it was a declaration. A declaration that the land, the people, and the legacy of his ancestors would not be taken. And as long as he drew breath, he would stand and fight for it. The rancher entered the cabin, the door closing softly behind him. He looked around at the familiar walls, the place where he had fought so hard to make a home. This was his life, and he would protect it with everything he had. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The rancher sat down by the fire, his thoughts drifting back to the battle, to the warriors who fought alongside him, and to the future that lay ahead. The land was his, but the fight for it would never truly end. But for now, the silence felt like peace, and the rancher allowed himself a moment of rest. He had done what needed to be done, but he knew that soon enough, the land would call him back into the fight. And when it did, he would be ready. The Cherokee mark would not just be a symbol of the past. It would be a beacon for the future, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for. Discover the thrilling world of Western stories as a lone rancher fights to protect his land and legacy in this epic tale. With bandits, mercenaries, and Cherokee warriors standing by his side, the rancher must face dangerous foes and embrace his heritage to survive. Set in the rugged terrain of the Wild West, this story captures the spirit of perseverance and honor found in the best Western stories. As the rancher stands against relentless threats, he learns the true meaning of strength, unity, and the importance of standing tall for what is his. With battles, strategy, and unshakable resolve, this narrative showcases the harsh realities of frontier life and the warrior spirit that drives the characters. If you enjoy gripping Western stories filled with courage and conflict, this tale will leave you on the edge of your seat. Join the rancher as he defends his home, faces off against his enemies, and proves that some things are worth fighting for in this unforgettable adventure of survival and justice. Immerse yourself in the world of Western stories, where the fight for honor and land never ends.